I'm curious about the founder, right? The role of the founder in all of this, and let's just spend a few minutes there. A few weeks ago, there was quite an interesting blog post by Jessica Livingston, who's at I think she's at Y Combinator, which is one of the incubators in the US, and she wrote a post about what to look for in founders. And one of the things she identified was that domain expertise, that you needed to kind of know the area that you were operating in quite well to increase your chances of success. And another very well-known venture capitalist, Vinod Khosla, he's absolutely sort of storied, been in the business for 30 years, said, well, actually, if you look at these really outlying companies, like a Tesla, for example, the founder didn't know anything about the domain. How important do you think domain expertise is to deliver the kind of extreme returns that the industry looks for in its founders?
I'd say domain expertise does matter in some sectors, but perhaps not as much as people think. And from a founder perspective, I really don't think it matters nearly as much as obsession. That's a word that we come back to a lot at Kindred. We spend a lot of time at Kindred with our founders asking the question why. And you ask a why question 3 or 4 or 5 times to peel back the onion, and you really get to what's at the root of the motivation of a particular founder. Why do they have such a motivation to solve this problem? And why are they going to stop at nothing to get there? And you have this wave of sort of tourists or entrepreneurs, for lack of a better term, when you have these quote unquote hot industries, which I'd say entrepreneurship and venture capital are quite hot at the moment. So there's quite a funny Harvard Business School set of charts that you can look at, which shows where Harvard Business School graduates go to post-graduation. And you look at that over the decades, and it's like a near perfect picture of what was extrinsically valued as the most impressive thing that one could do, or the most lucrative profession at the time. So banking in the 80s and private equity in the 90s and hedge funds in the 2000s, and then entrepreneurship and venture capital in the last decade. And that sort of funny line of when a Harvard Business School graduate gets in, you should get out, actually, because that's the sort of apex, that's the pinnacle of the field, and it's all going downhill from there.
I'm a bit older than you, Layla, so I remember speaking at Harvard Business School in '96, just as the dot-com boom was about to accelerate, and everyone was going into the dot-com
right.
But you're right, absolutely right. It's a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator.
Absolutely. And so I think that's why this depth of motivation, this question of why, is such a critical one to get to. And I think what you look for is someone who's so obsessed to solve that particular problem. And they think the best way, or maybe the only way to solve that problem, is via starting a company. But it's sort of the means to an end, not an end in itself. And where I say sort of domain expertise matters in some sectors and not so much in others, I think you can bring in domain expertise instead of necessarily needing it in a single founder and a single set of initial founders. And one example that comes to mind for me is, my good friend Kevin Nizami. He was a co-founder of Oscar Health, which is this sort of pioneering insurance company in the US. And when he spoke about his superpower, it was getting suits and hoodies to work together. He did need the suits, right? He needed the 50-year-old actuarians who were steeped in a few decades in the insurance world, but he also needed the hoodies. Like, he needed those people who would think very differently about an age-old industry. And so I think it's really the kind of combination of those things. And I think oftentimes, if you're so steeped in domain expertise, it's really hard to, think very innovatively about the future, to break from the mold of the old and go into the new. And you see that a lot in diligence. So, if you're looking to speak to experts in the field, by definition, they represent the incumbency, right? And they'll oftentimes be quite negative about a new innovation and point out all the reasons it won't work. I think you need a fair amount of naivete to embark on any of these journeys. And somehow the knowledge of all the things that can go wrong can inhibit people from diving in and actually taking the plunge.